The muddy water still haunted Vincent Lawrence's dreams 6 months after it had swallowed everything he owned. And some mornings, he woke gasping as though drowning all over again in that merciless current that had torn through the valley last spring of 1884. He had been working a small ranch outside Watsonville, California, building something solid after years of drifting. And then the Pajero River had surged over its banks in a rage nobody had predicted, washing away his livestock, his cabin, his tools, and nearly his life. Now he wandered the town with $7 in his pocket and the clothes on his back, taking odd jobs where he could find them, sleeping in the livery stable when the owner looked the other way, and wondering if a man could rebuild from nothing when he was already 32 years old and bone-tired. The September morning came bright and clear as he walked down Main Street, his stomach growling because he had skipped breakfast to save money, his boots worn so thin he could feel every pebble through the soles. He stopped outside the general store where a notice board displayed various announcements, most of them warning about the damage still visible throughout the valley, a few advertising work. His eyes caught on a new posting, the ink still fresh and dark against the pale paper. Ranch hand needed. Steady work, room and board included. Inquire at the Langford Ranch, 3 miles north on River Road. Ask for Penelope Langford. Vincent pulled the notice down and studied it, his calloused fingers careful with the paper as though it might disintegrate like everything else had. Room and board meant he would not have to sleep another night listening to horses shifting in their stalls, and steady work meant he could start saving again, maybe even think about the future. He folded the notice into his shirt pocket and started walking north, following River Road as it curved through land still scarred by the flood's passage, the grass just beginning to recover in patches of tentative green. The Langford Ranch appeared after an hour of walking, a sprawling property with a 2-story white house that had somehow survived the flood mostly intact, though he could see the high water marks staining the lower boards. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and sections of fencing lay in splintered heaps waiting for repair. Cattle grazed in the distance, fewer than the land could support, and chickens pecked at the dirt near the house. Vincent approached the front porch and knocked, his heart beating harder than seemed reasonable for a simple job inquiry. The woman who opened the door was not what he expected. She stood maybe 5'6", with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple blue dress with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her face was striking rather than pretty, with strong features and eyes the color of creek water, greenish-brown and guarded. She looked to be in her late 20s, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of exhaustion held at bay by sheer determination. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. Vincent removed his hat, suddenly aware of how he must look after months of barely scraping by. "I am here about the ranch hand position, madam, Vincent Lawrence. I saw your notice in town." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze taking in his worn clothes and lean frame, but also something else, perhaps the steadiness in his eyes or the respectful way he held himself. "I am Penelope Langford. Come in, Mr. Lawrence. We can talk inside." The house was clean but showed signs of recent struggle, furniture pushed against walls where the flood had likely reached, rugs missing, a faint smell of damp still lingering despite the months that had passed. She led him to the kitchen and gestured for him to sit at a worn wooden table while she poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on the stove. "I will be honest with you," she said, sitting across from him. "My husband died in the flood. He went out trying to move the cattle to higher ground and the water took him. They found his body 3 days later, 2 miles downstream." Her voice remained steady, but Vincent saw her fingers tighten around her coffee cup. "I have been trying to manage this place alone since then, but there is too much for one person. I need someone who can repair fences, work with the cattle, fix the barn before winter comes." The flood took my hired hands too, swept them right off their feet, and they headed for Sacramento the day after, wanted nothing more to do with this valley. Vincent nodded slowly, processing her words. "I am sorry for your loss, madam. I lost everything in that same flood. Had a small place downstream from here. The water came in the middle of the night and I barely made it out alive." Something shifted in her expression, a recognition of shared trauma. "Then you understand. Everyone in town looks at me with pity like I am something broken. I am tired of pity. I need someone who will work hard and help me save what is left of this ranch. I can offer $30 a month, 3 meals a day, and the spare room upstairs. It is not much, but it is what I can afford." "It is more than I have now," Vincent said honestly. "I can start today if you need me." For the first time, something like relief crossed her face. "Today would be good. Let me show you around." They spent the afternoon walking the property while Penelope explained what needed doing. The list was daunting. Fences down in a dozen places, the barn door hanging crooked, the chicken coop needing a new roof, irrigation ditches clogged with debris from the flood. Vincent listened carefully, already planning the order of tasks in his mind, calculating what could be done with the tools and materials he saw in the damaged barn. "Your husband built a good place here," Vincent said as they stood looking out over the land. "The bones are solid. It will come back." Penelope glanced at him with an unreadable expression. "You really think so? Some days I wonder if I should just sell and move to town, try to start over somewhere the water cannot reach." "The water can reach anywhere," Vincent said quietly. "I learned that. But running does not change what happened. Sometimes you have to stand and rebuild, even when it seems impossible." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I suppose that is what I have been doing, whether I knew it or not. Come on, I will show you your room and then we can have supper. You look like you have not had a proper meal in a while." Vincent could not deny that. The room she gave him was small but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the eastern pasture. He set his few belongings on the dresser, washed his face in the basin she provided, and tried not to think about how long it had been since he had a space to call his own, even temporarily. Dinner was simple but plentiful. Beef stew with vegetables from Penelope's garden, fresh bread, and apple pie that she admitted came from a neighbor. They ate mostly in silence, the kind that was comfortable rather than awkward, two tired people grateful for hot food and a roof overhead. When they finished, Vincent insisted on washing the dishes while Penelope checked on the chickens and locked up the barn. That first night in a real bed, Vincent slept without dreaming of water. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Vincent rose before dawn and worked until dusk, tackling the endless repairs with steady determination. Penelope worked alongside him more often than not, holding boards while he hammered, helping string new wire for the fences, climbing up to hand him shingles when he repaired the chicken coop roof. She was stronger than she looked and never complained, even when the work was backbreaking. They talked while they worked, small conversations that slowly revealed who they were beneath the grief and loss. Vincent learned that Penelope had come to California from Ohio with her husband Thomas 5 years earlier, chasing the dream of ranch life in the West. She had been 23 and full of hope, and Thomas had been a good man, patient and hardworking, if not particularly romantic. She admitted this last part with a kind of guilty honesty, as though confessing something shameful. "I cared for him," she said one afternoon while they mended a section of fence. "But I am not sure I loved him, not the way the novels talk about love. Does that make me terrible?" Vincent paused in his work, considering his words carefully. "It makes you honest. Some people marry for love, some for partnership, some because it seems like the right thing to do. You built a life with him. That counts for something. Did you ever marry?" She asked, and he noticed she had started looking at him more directly lately, not always keeping her eyes on her work. "Almost, once. Girl back in Texas when I was 25. But she wanted to move to Dallas and live in town, and I could not see myself anywhere but on the land. We parted ways and she married a banker." He smiled slightly. "Last I heard, she was happy. Sometimes people want different things, and that is nobody's fault." October arrived with cooler weather and the main repairs mostly completed. The barn stood straight again, the fences were mended, and the ranch had started to feel functional rather than broken. Vincent had put on weight from regular meals, and Penelope smiled more often, the haunted look gradually fading from her eyes. One evening after supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Penelope had brought out 2 glasses of whiskey, something she said Thomas had saved for special occasions. "What are we celebrating?" Vincent asked, accepting the glass. "Survival," she said simply, touching her glass to his. "6 months ago I thought this place would kill me, that I would work myself into the ground trying to save it. Now I think we might actually make it through winter." "We will," Vincent said with more confidence than he felt. Winter in California was not as harsh as some places, but it brought its own challenges, and they still had work to do. They sipped their whiskey in comfortable silence, and Vincent found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way the fading light caught in her hair, the small scar on her wrist from a barbed wire accident 2 weeks earlier that he had bandaged for her. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped being just his employer and had become something else, something he was afraid to name because he had no right to those feelings. She was a widow, still mourning, and he was just a drifter who had washed up on her doorstep. But when he glanced over, he found her watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Vincent," she said softly, and his name in her mouth sounded different than when anyone else said it. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." She set down her glass and turned to face him more fully. "When Thomas died, I felt guilty because I was not as devastated as I thought I should be. People kept telling me how much I must miss him, and I did, but not the way they meant. I missed having help with the work, missed not being alone. But I did not miss him the way a woman should miss her husband." She paused, gathering courage for whatever came next. "These past weeks with you, I have felt more alive than I did in 5 years of marriage. You make me laugh. You listen when I talk. You look at me like I am a person, not just a woman to be pitied or a burden to be managed." Vincent's heart hammered in his chest. "Penelope, I do not want to take advantage. You are not," she interrupted. "I am telling you this because I need you to know. I am 28 years old and I feel like I am just waking up. I know it has not been long since Thomas died, and maybe people would judge me for feeling this way, but I cannot keep pretending I do not notice how I feel when you are near." He set down his own glass and took her hand carefully, as though she might break. "I notice too," he admitted. "I have been noticing since the day I met you. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and you deserve someone who sees that. If you will let me, I would like to be that someone, but only if you are sure. I will not have you doing this out of loneliness or gratitude." "It is not loneliness," she said firmly, "and it is not gratitude, though I am grateful. Vincent, I think I am falling in love with you, and it scares me because I did not expect to feel this way ever, let alone so soon after losing Thomas. But I cannot lie to myself or to you." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then we will take this slow. We will do it right. I am not going anywhere, Penelope. This is where I want to be." They sat together until full dark, holding hands and talking quietly about the future. And when they finally went inside, Vincent kissed her goodnight at the bottom of the stairs with a tenderness that made her eyes shine with unshed tears of the good kind. November brought the first real rain since the flood, and everyone in the valley held their breath, watching the river with wary eyes. But this was normal autumn rain, steady and gentle, soaking into the earth rather than tearing it apart. Vincent and Penelope worked to ensure the drainage around the house and barn was clear, and they brought the cattle closer to the homestead where they could be monitored. Their relationship deepened as the days grew shorter. They were careful about propriety, aware that the town gossips would have plenty to say about a widow and her hired hand, but behind closed doors they allowed themselves to be honest. Vincent kissed her when the urge struck, and Penelope let herself lean into his embrace without guilt. They talked late into the night about their dreams and fears, discovering all the ways they fit together. One evening in late November, Vincent rode into town to pick up supplies and heard the whispers that followed him through the general store. He ignored them until he was checking out and the shopkeeper, a balding man named Harold with opinions about everything, decided to share his thoughts. "Heard you are working for the Langford widow," Harold said with a smirk. "Must be nice, steady job and a woman who probably needs comforting." Vincent fixed him with a cold stare. "Mrs. Langford is a respectable woman running a ranch by herself after losing her husband. If I hear you or anyone else suggesting otherwise, we will have a problem. Do you understand?" Harold paled and nodded quickly. "No offense meant." "See that it stays that way." Vincent gathered his purchases and left, his jaw tight with anger. He knew there would be talk, but he would not tolerate anyone disrespecting Penelope. When he returned to the ranch and told her what had happened, she smiled and touched his cheek. "Thank you for defending me, but I stopped caring what the town thinks months ago. Let them talk. We know the truth." "And what is the truth?" he asked, pulling her close. "That I am in love with a good man who came into my life when I needed him most, and I am not ashamed of it." Vincent kissed her deeply, no longer holding back the full measure of his feelings. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words spilling out before he could second-guess them. "I know it has not been long, and I know people will talk, but I do not want to spend another day without knowing you are mine and I am yours. Marry me, Penelope." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you certain? You could have any woman, Vincent." "You do not have to tie yourself to a widow with a struggling ranch and a past." "I do not want any woman, I want you. I want this ranch and this life and every challenge that comes with it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work beside you every day and hold you every night." I have never been more certain of anything. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Watsonville, with only a handful of guests, including Penelope's neighbor Martha and her husband, and the livery owner who had let Vincent sleep in his stable and seemed pleased to see him land on his feet. The preacher, an elderly man who had known Thomas, hesitated before agreeing to perform the ceremony, concerned about the propriety of such a quick remarriage. "Thomas Langford was my friend," the preacher said carefully. "I need to know this is what you truly want, Penelope." She met his eyes steadily. "Thomas was a good man and I honor his memory, but he would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone. Vincent makes me happy in ways I never knew I could be. This is what I want." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Vincent spoke his vows in a steady voice, promising to love and cherish her, to work beside her, to build a life worthy of her strength and courage. Penelope's voice shook slightly but never wavered as she promised the same. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed his bride with a joy that made the small gathering applaud. They celebrated with dinner at Martha's house, and then Vincent drove Penelope back to their ranch in the wagon, both of them grinning like fools. That night, they truly became husband and wife in every way, and Vincent marveled at how two broken people could come together and create something whole. Penelope fell asleep in his arms, and he lay awake for a long time just watching her breathe, grateful beyond words for the flood that had destroyed his old life and led him to this new one. Winter passed in a blur of hard work and harder-won happiness. They worked the ranch together, making improvements and slowly expanding the herd. Vincent proved to have a good head for business, and Penelope's practical nature balanced his occasional optimism. They made a good team, and the ranch began to thrive in ways it never had before. The town eventually accepted their marriage, helped by the fact that Vincent and Penelope were clearly devoted to each other and worked harder than most couples half their age. The whispers faded, replaced by grudging respect. Spring arrived in 1885 with wildflowers carpeting the valley, and the river running high but controlled within its banks. Vincent and Penelope stood on the porch one evening in late April, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much had changed in a year. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if the flood had not happened?" Penelope asked, leaning into his side. Vincent wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes, but I would not change it. That flood took everything I had, but it brought me to you. I would lose it all again for that. I used to hate the river," she admitted. "It took Thomas and I blamed it for everything, but I am starting to see it differently now. The water gives life as much as it takes it. We would not have this valley without the river." "And I would not have you without the flood," Vincent said, kissing the top of her head. "Strange how tragedy can lead to blessing if you survive it." They were quiet for a moment, then Penelope turned in his arms with a particular smile that made his heart skip. "Speaking of blessings," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach, "I have news." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by pure delight. "Are you certain?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We are going to have a baby, Vincent, in late October, he thinks." He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing with the kind of joy that erases all the hard times that came before. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly. "You have given me everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A home, a purpose, a future. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret you," she said, and kissed him again. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Vincent built a cradle in the evenings, his hands careful as he sanded and polished the wood. Penelope sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and Martha came over regularly to offer advice and help, having raised 4 children of her own. Vincent became fiercely protective, insisting Penelope rest more and work less, though she protested she was pregnant, not fragile. They compromised, with Penelope doing lighter tasks and Vincent taking on the heavier labor. He hired a young man from town to help during the summer, a kid named James who was eager to learn ranching and did not mind the hard work. As Penelope's belly grew, Vincent found himself touching it often, marveling at the life growing inside her. He talked to the baby sometimes when they were alone, telling it stories about the ranch and promising to be the best father he could be. "I never thought I would have this," he admitted one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her stomach. "A wife I love, a child on the way, a place to call home. There were times after the flood when I thought I would die alone with nothing to show for my life. You saved me as much as I saved you," Penelope said, covering his hand with hers. "We saved each other." October arrived with cooler weather and morning fog that burned off by midday. Penelope grew restless and uncomfortable, ready for the baby to arrive. On a crisp afternoon near the end of the month, her water broke while she was kneading bread in the kitchen. Vincent immediately sent James racing into town for the doctor and Martha, while he tried to keep Penelope calm and comfortable. "It is too early," she panted, gripping his hand. "The baby is not due for another 2 weeks." "Babies come when they are ready," Vincent said with more confidence than he felt. "You are strong, Penelope. You can do this." Martha arrived first, bustling in with practiced efficiency and taking charge of the situation. The doctor came an hour later, and Vincent was banished downstairs to pace and worry while the women worked upstairs. He heard Penelope cry out several times and had to physically restrain himself from running up to her. James sat with him, offering silent support, and Vincent was grateful for the company even though neither of them spoke much. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness, the sun setting and darkness falling before he finally heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Martha appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling. "You have a son, Vincent, a healthy baby boy, and Penelope is doing well. Come meet your son." Vincent took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom. Penelope lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached the bed and looked down at the baby in her arms. The infant had a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face, and he was the most beautiful thing Vincent had ever seen besides his wife. "Can I hold him?" Vincent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Penelope carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and Vincent cradled his son with infinite gentleness, afraid he might break something so small and perfect. The baby stopped fussing and blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, and Vincent felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. Vincent thought for a moment, then said, "Thomas, for your first husband. He was part of bringing us together in a way. Without him building this ranch, you would not have been here for me to find." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "That is generous of you." "It is right," Vincent said simply. "Thomas Langford Lawrence, our son." The doctor checked both mother and baby once more, declared them healthy, and left with instructions for care. Martha stayed overnight to help, insisting they both needed rest, and finally, Vincent and Penelope were alone with their son. Vincent lay beside Penelope in the bed, careful not to jostle her, while baby Thomas slept in the cradle beside them. They watched him in wonder, hardly able to believe this tiny person existed because they had found each other. "I love you," Penelope whispered. "I loved you before, but now, seeing you with our son, I love you even more." "I love you too," Vincent said, kissing her gently. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known. Thank you for our son. Thank you for everything." They fell asleep holding hands, their baby breathing softly beside them, and outside the window the stars shone bright over the valley that had taken so much and given back even more. The weeks after Thomas's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby woke frequently to nurse, and Penelope was tired in a way she had never experienced, but Vincent helped however he could, changing diapers and walking with Thomas when he fussed, letting Penelope rest. James continued helping with the ranch work, and Vincent hired him on permanently, giving them the flexibility to focus on their new family. As winter approached, they settled into a rhythm. Thomas grew and thrived, and Penelope recovered her strength. Vincent proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle but firm when needed. He sang to Thomas in a surprisingly good voice, old cowboy songs and lullabies he remembered from his own childhood. Christmas came and they celebrated quietly, just the three of them and James, who had nowhere else to go. Penelope cooked a feast, and Vincent gave her a locket with a tiny curl of Thomas's hair inside. She gave him a new pair of boots, sturdy and well-made, to replace the ones that had been falling apart when he first arrived. "To another year," Vincent said, raising his glass in a toast, "and to many more after that." They touched glasses and drank, and baby Thomas gurgled happily in his cradle by the fire, and outside snow fell gently on the valley, covering everything in white. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There was a dry summer in 1886 that tested their water resources, and a bout of illness in 1887 that swept through the valley and left baby Thomas dangerously feverish for 3 terrifying days before breaking. But they weathered each crisis together, their love and partnership only growing stronger. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn determination. In 1888, Penelope gave birth to a second son they named Samuel, and 2 years later a daughter arrived, whom they named Rose after Vincent's mother. The ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming one of the most successful in the valley. They expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, adding rooms and a proper nursery. Vincent built a better barn and improved the irrigation system, and Penelope kept meticulous records that helped them plan for lean years. The town that had once whispered about them now held them up as an example of perseverance and success. Vincent served on the town council, and Penelope helped establish a school for the valley children. They never forgot where they had come from or how close they had come to losing everything. On their 5th wedding anniversary in December 1890, they stood together on the porch where Vincent had first proposed, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Thomas was 5 now, Samuel was 2, and baby Rose was sleeping in her mother's arms. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Penelope asked, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. "When I showed you around the ranch, I said your husband built a good place and that it would come back," Vincent recalled. "You were right, but it was not Thomas who brought it back. It was you. You took something broken and made it beautiful again." Vincent turned to kiss her, careful not to wake the baby. "We did it together. That is how it works with us." "That is how it works," she agreed, smiling. Young Thomas ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Papa, come see the fort Samuel and I built." "I will be right there," Vincent promised, ruffling his son's hair. As Thomas ran back to his brother, Vincent looked at Penelope and the children and the land spreading out before them, and he thought about the flood that had destroyed his old life. It had seemed like the end of everything, but it had really been a beginning, washing him up at the doorstep of the woman who would become his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in all things. Some people said the flood of 1884 was the worst disaster to hit the Pajaro Valley, and maybe they were right. But for Vincent Lawrence, it was the flood that brought him home. Years continued to pass in the California Valley, marked by seasons of planting and harvest, by children growing and the ranch expanding. By 1895, Thomas was 10 years old and already helping with the cattle, showing the same love of the land his parents shared. Samuel at 7 was more interested in books and spent hours learning to read and write with his mother. Rose at 5 was pure sunshine, chattering constantly and following her father everywhere when he let her. The flood of 1884 had become part of the valley's history, a story told to newcomers and children who had not lived through it. The river had flooded again twice in the intervening years, but never as severely, and the valley had learned to prepare better, building better drainage and warning systems. On a spring evening in 1896, Vincent and Penelope sat on their porch as they had countless times before, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The children were inside having supper with James, who had become like family over the years. 12 years, Penelope said softly. 12 years since the day you knocked on my door looking for work. Best decision I ever made, Vincent said, taking her hand. Coming here asking you for that job. Best decision I ever made was saying yes. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you know what I love most about our life? What is that? That we built it together. Every fence, every field, every child. We did not inherit this or have it given to us. We made it with our own hands and our own hearts. Vincent squeezed her hand. I wake up grateful every single day, for you, for our children, for this place. The flood took everything from me, but it brought me to you, and you gave me a life beyond anything I imagined. We gave each other that, she corrected gently. I was drowning when you arrived, Vincent. Not in water, but in grief and loneliness and the weight of trying to do everything alone. You saved me as much as I saved you. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the evening, the lowing of cattle, the chickens roosting, the distant bark of their dog. Inside, they could hear their children laughing at something James had said, and the sound was sweeter than any music. Should we have more? Penelope asked suddenly, and Vincent turned to look at her with raised eyebrows. More children. Why not? I am only 39 and the doctor says I am healthy. I always thought 4 would be a good number. Vincent grinned. I would not object to another baby in the house, though we might need to add on to the nursery again. We will manage, we always do. And they did. In the spring of 1897, Penelope gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Grace. The children doted on their baby sister, and the house rang with the sounds of a full, happy family. Vincent turned 45 that year, his hair starting to gray at the temples, his hands more scarred and weathered than ever. But he had never felt younger. He had a wife he adored, 4 healthy children, a prosperous ranch, and a community that respected him. The drifter who had lost everything in a flood had found more than he had ever dreamed possible. On a summer evening in 1900, as the century turned and the world spoke of progress and new beginnings, Vincent and Penelope celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Their children ranged from 15-year-old Thomas to 3-year-old Grace, and the house was full of noise and life. After the children were in bed, Vincent and Penelope walked down to the river, something they rarely did anymore. They stood on the bank where the water ran dark and smooth in the moonlight, and Penelope shivered despite the warm night. I used to hate this river, she said. It took Thomas Langford and nearly destroyed everything. But it also carved this valley and makes the land fertile, Vincent said. And it brought me here to you. The river gives and takes, that is its nature. I can accept that now, Penelope said. I can look at it and feel at peace. That is because of you. Vincent turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Penelope Lawrence, you are the love of my life. Every day with you is a gift. I promise you right now, standing by this river that brought us together, I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. More than I ever knew it was possible to love someone. You are my heart, Vincent. They kissed in the moonlight, 2 people who had been broken and had healed each other, and the river flowed past them toward the sea, eternal and indifferent and beautiful. The children grew and eventually left to make their own ways in the world. Thomas took over running the ranch with his father, showing the same dedication and love of the land. Samuel went to college in San Francisco and became a teacher, returning to the valley to start a school. Rose married a young rancher from the next county, and they visited often with their own children. Grace, the baby, proved to have a talent for drawing and eventually moved to Sacramento to study art, though she came home for every holiday. Vincent and Penelope grew old together on the land they had saved and built. Their hair went gray, their hands became gnarled with arthritis, their steps slowed, but their love never diminished. They sat on their porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the valley, holding hands as they had for decades, talking, or simply being together in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. In the spring of 1918, Vincent woke before dawn as he had for 40 years and found Penelope still asleep beside him. He watched her breathe for a moment, her face peaceful and still beautiful to him, despite the lines time had etched there. At 61, she was as strong-willed and capable as ever, though she let their children and grandchildren do more of the heavy work now. He rose carefully so as not to wake her and dressed quietly, then went downstairs to make coffee. Through the kitchen window, he could see the eastern sky just beginning to lighten, the promise of another day on the land he loved. Penelope joined him half an hour later, wrapped in the shawl he had given her on their 20th anniversary. She poured herself coffee and stood beside him at the window, and they watched the sun rise together as they had 1,000 times before. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How lucky I am," Vincent said. "How that flood 34 years ago seemed like the end of everything, but it was really the beginning. How I found you and you found me, and together we built something that will outlast us both." Penelope leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Our grandchildren will work this land," she said, "and their children after them. We left them something good, Vincent, something worth keeping." "We did," he agreed, "and we did it together." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the valley, waking the ranch to another day of life and work and love. Behind them, they could hear footsteps on the stairs as Thomas and his wife arrived to help with the morning chores. Their grandson ran through the kitchen with a whoop of excitement, heading outside to collect eggs. Vincent and Penelope smiled at each other. No words needed after 33 years of marriage. They had lost everything in a flood and found each other in the aftermath. They had built a life from nothing, raised children, weathered every storm together. They had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through abundance and scarcity, through youth and into old age. And when the time came many years later, when they had both lived long and full lives surrounded by family and love, they were laid to rest side by side in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, under trees that had grown from saplings they had planted together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood by the graves and told stories of the cowboy who lost everything in the flood, and the widow who offered him work and something more, and how together they had built a legacy of love and perseverance that would echo through generations. The ranch continued under Thomas's careful stewardship and eventually passed to his children. The house remained in the family, expanded and updated but keeping its essential character. The porch where Vincent and Penelope had spent so many evenings still the heart of the home. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the valley in shades of gold and rose, people sitting on that porch swore they could feel the presence of the two people who had loved each other so well, who had taken tragedy and transformed it into triumph, who had proven that sometimes the worst disasters lead to the greatest blessings. The river still ran through the valley, giving life and sometimes taking it, eternal and indifferent. But the land it watered remembered Vincent and Penelope Lawrence, the cowboy and the widow who had found each other after the flood and built a love story that became legend. passed down through the years as proof that even when everything is lost, hope and love can bloom again in the most unexpected places. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived together from that first day when Vincent knocked on Penelope's door looking for work and found instead a home, a partner, a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. The flood had swept away his old life, but it had brought him to the banks of something far greater than he had ever known. And Penelope, widowed and struggling, had opened her door to a stranger and found the great love she had not known she was seeking. Together they had rebuilt what the water destroyed. Together they had created a family and a legacy. Together they had loved with the kind of fierce, enduring devotion that transforms two separate lives into one beautiful whole. And that love, that partnership, that triumph over tragedy, lived on in the land they had worked, in the children and grandchildren they had raised, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the stories told around dinner tables and on front porches, as the sun set over the California valley they had called home. Vincent Lawrence had lost everything in the flood of 1884. Penelope Langford had offered him work and something more. What they had built together in the years that followed was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. A story that ended not with loss but with legacy, not with sorrow but with joy, not with an ending but with a love that continued long after their time on earth was done.